Thank you. I want to thank Yvette McGreeve-Gown, the next Lieutenant Governor of Ohio. Isn't she great? I'm very impressed with her. We have a lot of candidates here. I'm grateful that Congressman Tim Ryan, David Pepper, our state auditor candidate, State Treasurer Kevin Boyce, Supreme Court candidate Mary Jane Trapp, Attorney General Richard Cordray are all here, along with Mayor Frank Jackson, the Mayor of Parma, Dean DePerio, Mayor Gary Norton of East Cleveland, Mary Garistar of Middleburg Heights, and Senator Shirley Smith. Thank you all for being here, and thank the students for being here and the people from the neighborhood. Folks, and since I'm an old band boy, I want to thank the band for being here. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. My second trip to Ohio in 3 days. You guys are going to get sick of me. And sometimes I wonder whether I'm too old to do this, but but I wanted to, wait. But I have to be here for my family because the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense are the only two people in the federal government who can't participate in electoral politics. So Hillary's in the Middle East trying to make peace, and I'm here in Ohio trying to make progress. This is an amazing election to me, just as a lifetime observer of such things. I spend most of my time now doing my foundation work and a lot of time in Haiti while we're doing the reconstruction work there, and my foundation works in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, and Southeast Asia. And I spend a lot of time in places where people would find this debate strange because most people live on less than $2 a day. But I also spend a lot of time in other wealthy countries raising the money to do the work I do around the world, where they're having similar problems and similar debates. Everybody says, oh, this is going to be a terrible year for the Democrats because they have the House and the Senate, and so they should be blamed for whatever's going on. And they have the White House, and so we should vote against their candidates and the governors and everybody else. And then they say there is this enthusiasm gap because a lot of the people who voted in 2006 to change the Congress or 2008 for President Obama are too bored or disconnected or disappointed or whatever to show up and vote. Anger and apathy. I'd also say that people who analyze it that way have a fair amount of amnesia. So here's what I want to say about it. Look, the people of Ohio have a choice to make. I'm here today because your governor is a close friend of mine. I think he's one of the finest people I ever knew, in or out of politics. He's been good to me. He's been good to my Secretary of State. But I'm here because I love my country, and I feel especially indebted to Ohio. Here is the state that guaranteed that I would win the nomination for president. Here is the state in November of 1992, when they called Ohio for me, all the networks said, well, he'll be president if you won Ohio. So I'm here because this really is the heartland of America. You have everything here. You have the largest number of good-sized cities. You have all this ethnic and economic and religious and cultural diversity. It's a fascinating place. And here's what I want to say about this stuff. Even now, I spend probably an hour a day reading things, trying to keep up with everything that's going on in this economy, asking myself every single day, what would you do? What should we do now? How can we get things going? here's how I see the politics and the economics. The political argument that is being made, it seems to me, by the Republicans, whether it's a state or national level, is the Democrats have been in everywhere for 21 months and they haven't fixed this mess we made them, so we should throw them out and put us back in. And some of them are unfairly, I think, trying to blame President Bush. It's not really the Republican Party and the Republican ideas. This is just President Bush. That's not fair. In fact, he's a raving liberal compared to some of the people they have nominated this year for office around the country. He had the misfortune to be the first Republican president that had an all-Republican Congress, so he could do what they've all been advocating for 30 years now. This is a contest of ideas, not people. They can say whatever mean things they want about all of our individual candidates. I find in politics most people are honest, good people. They do what they think is right. Their ideas are basically based on their ideology. They already got the answer, so they're impervious to evidence. And they say, they had 21 months, put us back in. The Democrats are saying something like this. Look, we found a big hole that we did not dig. And we didn't get out of it in 21 months, but at least we quit digging. So don't go back in reverse. Give us 2 more years. If it doesn't work, you have another election in just 2 years. You can vote us all out then. But for goodness sakes, we quit digging, don't bring back the shovel brigade. Now, let's look at the evidence underlying those 2 things. First of all, let's look at Ohio. Governor Strickland has done his best to get the economy going again and to support education and to make health care more affordable for children and for people who couldn't afford it otherwise. He's got a really good record. But how does it mesh with what we need to do? The thing that really bothers me about this election is hardly anybody talks about all that matters, which is what are we going to do now and who is more likely to do it? Now, everybody knows what we need. We need more good jobs, and we need to fill them with people that don't have jobs or with people that have part-time jobs. So question number 1, where are the new jobs going to come from? In every state, almost every state, you find the same thing. There are a few states that have specialty, get a disproportionate amount from tourism. New York gets a disproportionate amount from finance. But basically, most of the new jobs are going to come from small business, manufacturing, and clean energy and energy efficiency. That's where the job growth is for America. Okay? So, Strickland's kept taxes down on small business, given incentives for small business to expand, has an aggressive plan to recruit new industry, which has already gotten 55,000 new jobs to Ohio, and has consistently been voted in, since he's been governor, Ohio's been voted in the top 5 states in the country over and over again in terms of creating a clean energy economy. Furthermore, for 3 years in a row, Ohio has won 2007, 2008, 2009, a nonpartisan contest for which state has the best overall economic development program. It's not a Democratic or Republican contest. It's totally nonpartisan. The government headed by Governor Ted Strickland has won this contest 3 years in a row. Now, if that's number one issue, it would take really something for me, if I were an Ohio voter, to vote against that. Just because he happened to be a Democrat and the Democrats hadn't solved all the problems in 21 months. So what's the argument against him? Well, his opponent, as I understand it, is essentially promising to bring the ideas of the Washington Republicans down to Ohio. He was an executive at Lehman Brothers, which was the first big company to fail, not get bailed out, and that started this financial crisis. And then he was in the Congress, and he always tells people that he brokered for the Republicans the balanced budget bill that I signed. That is true, but misleading. And I give him credit for it. I enjoyed working with him. It was a good bill, did a lot of good. But what you need to know is this. Before that, he also was in with them when they shut the government down twice because I wouldn't agree to abolish the Department of Education, abolish the Environmental Protection Agency, cut student loans, cut Medicare, cut Medicaid, and basically gut the role of the federal government in my life to give people in my income group a bunch more tax cuts that would not have balanced the budget and certainly would not have helped the economy. They did that. Second thing, the other thing that he doesn't say because it's inconvenient is that we had reversed the fundamental premises of their economic policy. Let me remind you, before I was elected back in the dark ages and became president in 1993, the federal debt quadrupled in the 12 years before I took office. We produced 30% more jobs in our 8 years than they did in the 12 years before, and 10 times as many as they did in the 8 years after, and had 4 surpluses and paid $600 billion down on the debt. But what they don't tell you is, while that balanced budget bill was a good piece of legislation, 90% of the movement of the deficit toward zero, toward balance, would have occurred if that bill had never passed because of the heroic vote cast by the Congress, my party alone, without a single Republican, in 1993. It cost them the Congress in part, and all the Republicans said it would bring a terrible recession because we said, I'm sorry, we've been living on candy too long, we have to go to the dentist now. And they said, no, you never have to go to the dentist. We don't ever have to do anything. Those black things in your teeth are not really cavities. There's no way to balance the budget but to raise money or cut spending. And the bill in 1993 did 90% of the work of taking us to the balanced budget. So I say, give the governor's Republican opponent his 10% credit for the balanced budget, but give 90% of it to Ted Strickland and every other person who voted for that tough budget that sent us to the dentist in 1993. So, Ohio's also got, so that's the first thing. You've got to have a jobs program and somebody who can execute it. What's the second thing we got to do? We have to get some money from somewhere. You know how the Republican argument is, this stimulus was obviously a failure because we're not out of the woods, right? Is that their argument? Which shows you how terrible government spending is. Now, to believe that, you got to be so mad you can't think. And again, I don't mind people being mad. It's humiliating to go home and look across the table at your children at night and not knowing if you're going to be able to pay your bills this month or stay in your home or send your kid to college. I think everybody who's gotten shafted has a right to be mad. But if you are a responsible person, you don't let your anger cloud your judgment. Now, here's the fact. The size of the economic hole we were in when the president took office was $3 trillion, with a lot more just waiting to break on us, okay? The size of the stimulus was $800 billion. Of that $800 billion, only about a third went to create jobs. The other 2/3 was designed to help you tread water and not drown in that big hole you were in. Remember, 1/3 of that money went to tax cuts to moderate and low-income working people so they could go to the grocery store. Everybody's forgotten how bad it was back in the end of 2008 and the first of 2009. They could go to the grocery store and keep the grocer open. And 1/3 of the money was in aid to state and local governments so they wouldn't have to lay off 1 million educators and healthcare workers. That was treading money, treading water. 1/3 of the money went to stimulus to create jobs, infrastructure, bridges, roads, sewer projects, water projects, and clean energy. And every independent study shows that it created more jobs and saved more jobs than the experts said it would in the first place. It did work. It just wasn't enough to dig us out of the hole. So we have to say, where are we going to get the money? Here's what you need to know. The banks of America have $1.8 trillion in the bank, uncommitted loans. Not doing what Wall Street did at 20 or 30 to 1 leverage, just old-fashioned 10 to 1 banking, they could make $18 trillion in loans. We need to figure out what it takes to get those loans made. The corporations of America have $1.6 trillion. They do not want to ship overseas, but for some reasons, a variety of them actually, they haven't invested it in creating jobs again. We need to figure out what it takes to settle things down so they feel good about investing it. There's plenty of money there. Is really important here in this community college. And that is, if we can create the jobs and get the money to finance them, who's going to fill them? Because here, and I want all the young people to listen to this, this is the most important economic statistic you do not know. When the unemployment figures came out last month, we learned that we had more private sector jobs and fewer government jobs because the census workers were let go. It was done. But we learned something that shocked even me. For the first time since World War II, job openings, that is, the jobs you could fill this afternoon, the employers have said, I got this job, I want to hire somebody. Job openings are going up twice as fast as new hires. In this horrible economy where you have hundreds of applications for some vacancies. How can that be? There are two reasons. One is more than 10% of Americans are living in homes where the mortgage is worth more than the house and they can't afford to move. By far the bigger reason is that we didn't have enough people in institutions like this one, because while the jobs are open and people want jobs, they don't have the skills necessary to fill the jobs that are open. So you need somebody for a governor who will make darn sure that every month they know every job that's been vacant for 3 or 4 weeks, and that in some community college or on-site in the workplace, people have the money to train people to do that job. That's 5 million jobs. If no banks own money, if no corporations spend money, tomorrow we could have 5 million more people at work in this country if we just train people to do the jobs that people are trying to hire for today. Now, who's more likely to do that? You got a governor with one of the best job training programs in the country, and the other party wants to cut back on spending for education and everything else. I don't think this is rocket science. So if the answer is, what do we need to do and who's more likely to do it, the answer in Ohio is Ted Strickland. You should re-elect him, elect Yvette, and elect these other local officials and the congressmen that are working for him. Now, it doesn't take long to explain that. Where the job's going to be from, where's the money coming from, who's going to fill the jobs. What are we going to do, who's most likely to do it? You had a governor whose economic programs ranked the best in the country by nonpartisan people and won something called the Governor's Cup 3 years in a row. For years has been ranked as having one of the 5 best clean energy programs in the country. Believe me, there are millions of jobs there just coming around the pike. So what I want to ask all of you to do is to think about that. In Washington, I have said this everywhere, I think the President and the Congress have done better than they've gotten credit for, but you can't expect to get credit, and I didn't when I was President, if people don't feel better. People only hire us Democrats when things are messed up anyway. And if they don't feel better, I get it. But if the first rule of being in a hole is to quit digging, and we quit digging, and what you're really upset about is we're not climbing out quick enough, we ought to figure out what we got to do to climb out and go on into the future. The worst thing we could do is to elect a bunch of folks that when they're sworn in will have one hand on the Bible and the other hand they'll be holding a shovel. And they have, and I want to compliment them. They have been completely honest in this campaign. Well, some of the ones who said really wacky things are scrubbing their websites now, hoping nobody will notice for the election. But they've said, you know, if you elect us in Washington, we're going to repeal financial oversight and increase the risk that we'll do what we just did. It got us in this mess one more time. And we're going to repeal that health care bill so you won't know for sure that that health care bill's got a requirement that 85 cents of every dollar you pay in health insurance goes to health care for a change. Health insurance profits went up 26% last year, the worst year for America in anybody's lifetime, and they still raised prices so much their profits went up 26%. So the new law says from now on, 85 cents of every dollar you spend has to be spent on health care, not on paperwork, not on overhead, not on administrative costs, not on marketing, not on shareholder profits, but on health care. And in Washington, they promised to repeal the student loan reform that President Obama passed that nationalizes a policy started when I was president. We let the government loan money directly to institutions that wanted it. It cut the cost of the loans. It saved the students $1,300 on every $10,000 they borrowed when they repaid it. And it saved $9 billion for the students total and $4 billion for the taxpayers, because when kids could pay their loan back, they did. And more important, and now this goes national. The Obama reform goes beyond what I did. It goes everywhere. But more important, it says to every single young person, don't you dare not go to college or a community college because you're afraid you can't repay the debt. Because now you can pay, no matter how much you borrow, you can pay your debt back as a small fixed percent of your income. You can take a job as a teacher. You can take a job as a nurse. You can be a band director. You can be a music teacher. You can do whatever you need to do because you can pay that loan back. They want to repeal that so I can get a bunch more tax cuts. I think it's a mistake, folks. And I think that the reason this is even a serious election is that we're all disappointed we're not out of the hole yet. But I tell you, I'm an expert at this. I've worked on this stuff all my life. I do this work now. I'm trying to figure out, in Haiti, I got 1.7 million people that I'm responsible for, I feel responsible for, still living under tents and tarps. It's sickening. But we had a horrible hurricane in Florida when I took office. It took us a year there to get people out of their temporary housing. And this is America. This is hard. When I was governor, my state had an unemployment rate above the national average every year for 8 years till I ran for president. Then we led the country in job growth. It takes a long time to dig out of some holes. And I worked at it every single day. I worked at it just as hard the first year as I did the last. We're digging out of a hole. We shot ourselves in the foot in that financial crisis. And even before then, we were losing jobs every month of 2008. Even before then, we only had 2.5 million jobs, 10% as many as we had in the 8 years I was there. We have got to make a new beginning as a country. And we cannot make it with a bunch of negative name-calling, and we cannot make it with economic policy that is impervious to evidence. I just told the group I left that, I love coming to Ohio because it's such a football-crazy state. And when something's important to us like football, when it really matters, we look at the evidence. We don't listen to the hot air rhetoric, right? What's Ohio State going to do this week? What's the first thing they did when we started practice? Coaches looked at the game film, right? What's the second thing they did? They looked at the game film of next week's opponent, right? Cleveland Browns got a good team. They didn't win Sunday, so what do? They'll look at that game film. They'll say, what do we do wrong? What do we do right? What do we have to do different? Then they'll look at the game film of the opponent. The best ad on television today is on ESPN. There's two football players eating lunch in a college cafeteria, spouting football statistics to each other. It's stunning what they remember and what they know. And you're just blitzed out. And these four guys that look like you know, they never took a minute's exercise in their life. They come up, sit down at the table, and they stand there and look at them. And the guy with the thickest glasses finally looks at him and shakes his head and says, "Nerds," and walks off. The football players became the nerds when it came to something that matters to us. They knew what they were talking about. Evidence mattered. Now, the message to the people running against Ted Strickland and running for the Senate and the House and all these other things is, look, we took you to several seasons where we were 2-14. So you got rid of us and hired a new coaching staff. They ain't been to the Super Bowl yet. They were 6-8, and looks like it's going to be about 8-8 this year. Let's fire them, bring back the 2-14 team, and let them call the same plays on steroids and see what happens. I mean, you think about it. When something's really important to us, why do we revere the American military? You know those guys are over there, those men and women risking their lives in Afghanistan, but you know every single day they're watching what the adversary does. Every single day they're trying to learn something about the way people live in Afghanistan, the way they see the world. It's a fact-based effort. So I'm pleading with you. You got one of the finest governors that I ever served with. You got evidence to prove it. Pretend you're those guys sitting at that cafeteria table in the ESPN ad. And when you look at all these other candidates and you listen to them, believe me, you know, I'm never going to run for anything else again. When you reach my age, the only thing that matters about all this politics is not all the smoke and mirrors. It's three things. Are people better off when you quit than when you started? Do children have a brighter future? And are things coming apart or are coming together? The rest of this is all smoke and mirrors. If you look at the evidence, what are we going to do and who's more likely to do it? You will re-elect the governor and you will support these other candidates. Thank you and God bless you.